Hello, hello. Welcome to my safe space. My name is Lena. I am back to make another trauma deep dive, the purpose of which is to bring awareness to the devastating effects of childhood traumas they can have on us in adulthood. Today's deep dive is going to be about being able or not able to out your abuser, specifically a family member that sexually abuses you as a child. This happened to me, and I talk about it in my other video that you can see on the screen. But a long story short, I was sexually abused by my biological dad when I was ages 9 to 13. I did out him one time when I was about 15 or 16 years old. I told my uncle and aunt, who went to talk to him privately as soon as I told them. And I have no idea what he said to them, but whatever it was, they believed him and not me. Also, I told my other relatives so she could tell my mom, because my mom blocked me on Instagram, which was the only way I could communicate with her. It was quite recent. I was in my mid-30s by then, so this was a few years ago after the pandemic. I just couldn't believe that she abandoned me again right after I thought their relationship was rebuilt from scratch. But her reason for blocking me was that I cursed too much. Anyway, I haven't heard from her after that, and I don't even know what reaction she had, if any, when she found out. Another instance of me telling someone is something I'm not even sure happened. I think I told my grandpa when I was in my early 20s. I'm almost sure I can remember him with a shocked look on his face. And I can kind of remember my dad coming home, and I was expecting my grandpa to confront him, but they talked about some other bullshit, and that was it. Maybe this is exactly the reason why I'm not sure that it happened at all. I know I haven't talked to my grandpa about it. I know he didn't ask any questions. All I can vaguely remember was me just telling him about the fact, but that's it. So who knows anymore? Maybe I just dreamed about it too many times, or maybe it actually happened. Either way, there was never any repercussions from my dad. And repercussions for him is what I was afraid of the most when he was actively molesting me. Since he groomed me to believe that he was the only person in the whole world who loved me, I was afraid to lose that one person. I was sure that he really did love me, and that's how a dad is supposed to show his love to his daughter. I thought all other dads didn't love their daughters as much as my dad loved me. Somehow I knew back then that no one else was doing this too. I knew that I was special, and I knew that it was to be kept a secret. But I also knew that it was illegal. At some point, I found out. Criminal shows were extremely popular back then, and they had no filter whatsoever. Kids from my generation grew up watching these shows where they would see decomposing bodies, murder scenes, and rape victims. These things were regularly discussed, and they actually became everyone's favorite topic to discuss. From these shows, I found out what a pedophile meant and that it was illegal and wrong to molest a child, but I didn't take that information as a call for action. No, no, no. Instead, I was reassured that I must keep my abuse a secret. I must protect my dad from ever being discovered because he loves me and means well. And if anyone finds out, my dad will go to prison. That would be bad for two reasons, I thought. Number one, I would be left with my grandma, and she would never forgive me and treat me even worse than ever before. Basically, it meant that I would lose the only person who cared about me and loved me, my dad. And two, from those criminal shows, I knew what would happen to my dad if he went to prison. He would be raped and killed by other prisoners. Pedophiles did not live long in Ukrainian prisons. I love my dad, and I didn't wish him any harm, so of course I decided that it would be my top priority to keep everything a secret. Your mind does some mental gymnastics in order to protect you, including justification of your abuse and abusers, siding with them, protecting them, and helping them to cover up their crimes. Of course, a huge part in this was played by grooming. It was in my dad's best interest to make sure I believed his lies and played along. There are cases when kids out their abusers accidentally. For example, a child will make a Barbie and a Ken doll perform oral sex on one another. And when asked where they saw these actions, they say, Uncle Marvin does this to me. Uncle Marvin should be investigated and the child should be immediately isolated from Uncle Marvin. When I accidentally outed my dad, no one rang a bell, and I can recall a few of such instances. The first one was when I told my best friend that my dad does certain things to me because I'm so special. She was mortified, but we changed the subject quickly and she never told anyone and she doesn't remember anything like that anymore. Another time was when we were watching one of those criminal shows with my grandmother. And the episode we were watching was about a pedophile. So I told my grandmother that my dad is a pedophile by definition. And she told me, "Don't be making stuff up. Are you stupid?" I also told her one time that my dad was going to marry me because he already treats me like his wife. I don't remember what the response was, but it's safe to assume that she didn't think I said anything incriminating. Another time, I told my classmates that lime, not the lime, the fruit, but the white stuff they used to put on ceilings and walls to make them white, that it smelled like seminal fluid. Everyone was like, "How do you even know what it smells like?" And I had to make something up. But no one ever told an adult about that. We as kids were not given sexual education until it was a part of anatomy class in high school. Up until then, we had no knowledge of what private parts were and that we needed to tell somebody if anyone touched us inappropriately and stuff like that. Parents didn't teach us either. The issue was that people were and still are uncomfortable when they have to talk to their kids about that kind of stuff, which actually benefits predators. Sex education in schools is a must. Children need to know that there is a possibility of abuse and that they need to tell somebody immediately if anyone as little as hints at acting inappropriately around them. I can go on and on about this subject because I believe that the system is partially responsible for my abuse and the abuse of other children, or at least it's an accessory to the predator. I showed other signs of being a sexually abused child that I recognize as such now, being an adult. For example, I was deadly scared of being seen naked by anyone, even the other girls at the summer camp. I suddenly became scared of the camera and I hated to be photographed. The reason for that was because my dad took nude photos of me and stuff like that. So I hated being photographed after that. Plus, it didn't help that my grandmother called me ugly all the time. I suddenly lost interest in studying and just started misbehaving at school and didn't do my homework. I was sabotaging my abusers and was doing anything just not to fit into their mold. Here I'm talking about my dad and my grandmother, both narcissists and one of them a pedophile. Basically, there were clear signs if anyone cared to see them. I think another reason I didn't tell anyone at the time was out of fear I wasn't going to be believed and would only get myself in trouble for lying. After all, when I outed my dad accidentally, I was called stupid and was not taken seriously. I also knew that if my grandparents had to choose between their only son, the golden child, and me, the ugly, stupid bastard granddaughter, they would make an obvious choice. And I was sure they were going to give me up for adoption or something. But by the time I actually wanted to be removed from my home, I already was old enough to know that that's not how it works, and they can't just decide to give me up. Or I can't ask to be put in an orphanage while having alive and well caretakers who don't do drugs and aren't alcoholics. Basically, there was no real reason for me to be removed. Of course, I didn't think that my sexual abuse was enough of a reason. And maybe it wouldn't have been. It's possible my dad would go to prison and I would still be under my grandparents' guardianship. It was a lose-lose situation. I never had a chance to talk to authority either. We were not provided a trusted professional at school who we could trust with our problems at home. Most kids were physically abused at home and no one cared. It was the norm. And don't even get me started on emotional abuse, which is still considered something made up by a lot of people over there. Basically, it's not like we had an adult in school who would come to us to ask questions if everything is okay at home. There was no one to protect us. To be honest, even police couldn't be counted on. I don't even know if they would take me seriously and did anything if I went and told them. Because at some point, I contemplated going to police, but for all the reasons I mentioned, I didn't. Towards the end, I became very avoidant and tried to spend as little time around my dad as possible. When he visited over the weekends, I would try to spend all day with my friends outside. And I would make up excuses not to visit my dad at his house. I started missing bath time on purpose to repel him with bad smell, but that didn't do anything. I would straight up tell him that I didn't want to be a part of it, and then he would give me a silent treatment and would become very mean to me. I knew immediately what had to happen for him to love me again. He wanted to make me think that I'm not worthy of love if I don't conform. It worked for a few years, but as time went on, I got more and more resentful and eventually stopped falling for his manipulations. When he had to stop the abuse completely, which he had done only because I got my period and became doty, he became a complete monster, which is a story for another deep dive. But I went through hell and back in my mid-teens. I guess for him it was the time when he had to come up to terms with me growing up and him losing a victim to abuse. So he became the worst version of himself and eased off slowly into my late teens and early 20s. I know my reasons of not telling were not unique. Statistically, a child is less likely to tell that they're being sexually abused if some or all of these conditions are met. Number one, they have a non-supportive caregiver. Number two, the abuser is in a close relation to a child. Number three, the abuse wasn't a single incident. Number four, a child attempted to disclose abuse previously. 5, the abuser threatened the child, bribed them, or coerced. And finally, if the child is a male, they're less likely to disclose their abuse. The last condition does not apply to me, but all others do. There is a book called Hush, written by Nicole Braddock Bromley. You can read it for free on Libby if you have a library card. This book helped me understand why I didn't tell and to forgive myself for not telling. The author emphasizes the importance of not keeping your abuse a secret and that it's never too late to tell. This is why I'm telling my story publicly now. I think I owe this to the little me. Outing my abuser validates my experience and provides a sense of justice. When I came out to my husband for the first time, it was very freeing. I didn't tell him for years because I thought he was going to look at me differently. He once mentioned that if I had abortions before I met him, it would make me look bad because it would create some images in his head of me having sex with other men, something like that. I don't even know. So I thought if I told him about me being abused by my dad, he would have images of my dad and I having sex. Surely that would make me look bad or doty or whatever. So when I made a decision to tell him, I told him because 1, I didn't care if it meant he was going to leave me because that's how much I hated the idea of keeping it a secret any longer. And 2, at the time, I was acting up and was the worst version of myself and had to basically explain why I was such a bitch. Because I felt like he would understand me better if he knew what happened to me growing up. And I wasn't wrong about that. He did get a better understanding of why I behave certain way and why I have certain insecurities or fears. What I was wrong about, though, is that me telling him about my abuse would make me look dirty in his eyes. It didn't. My husband didn't leave me. He provided and still provides massive support, and I can certainly credit him for my recovery, at least partially. Having a support system is huge for victims of CSA at any age. After I told my husband, I could finally explain to him why I need therapy without having to lie. Because having this secret forces you to lie further. You can't explain to people why you really don't talk to your dad anymore when you don't want them to know about your abuse. You can't explain to your partner why you can't stand being touched and would never cuddle with them. You have to come up with something so that you don't out your abuser or even yourself, the victim. Because in those moments, you're protecting yourself too. A lot of times we want to hide this information because we don't want to be seen dirty, because we carry this shame inside of us for many years that somehow we think that it's our fault, or that we provoked them, or that we could make it stop but didn't, or it was our fault, or we deserved it, or something like that, which none of this is true. But that's just something that you believe for a number of years before you finally realize that it wasn't your fault, that you didn't deserve it, that you didn't provoke them, that you're not a bad person because it happened to you. They are the bad person. So there is no need to be ashamed of your abuse. The abuser should be ashamed of their actions. So the sooner you realize it, the better. So when you tell somebody, it's freeing because you are not ashamed anymore. You accept the fact that what happened to you is not something you should be ashamed of. It is a part of your past that isn't your fault. So after I told my husband, I was empowered to tell my friends. Every one of them was supportive, but none of them really understands the magnitude of this trauma, let's be honest. But even though I didn't feel understood, I still felt supported. I don't expect to be understood anymore, and I certainly don't use my trauma as an excuse for my negative traits. I'm working on becoming the version of myself that I remember I was pre-trauma, when I was kind, optimistic, and ambitious. In fact, I made a decision to recognize my trauma-related behaviors and do what I can to change them so that I can show my trauma a middle finger. Every time I succeed at it is a small victory that empowers me to keep doing it. Bottom line, telling my closest people about my CSA experience was freeing, and I highly recommend it. It is never too late, and the effects are massive. If I had to pick one tip on how to heal from CSA trauma, I would pick telling someone about it. Let me know in the comments if you told anyone, and if you did, what did it do for you? Did you feel the positive effects of telling, and would you recommend it to other survivors? On my channel, I'm doing a deep dive into my childhood traumas and their effects on my mental health in adulthood. Make sure to watch one of my other videos like this one to get a full picture. While I hope that you cannot relate to the same traumas I have, I still hope that you can find my videos helpful and motivating. I post a long video once a week, and I hope to see you in the next one. Have a great week. Bye.